Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is August 18th, 2022. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. This is a show about and for a real revolution, the most far-reaching revolution for the goal of nothing less than the emancipation of humanity here and all over the world from all forms of exploitation and oppression, a world where humanity could be fit caretakers of the earth. To get to that world, to overcome all forms of exploitation and oppression, requires overthrowing the system that perpetuates all of this, the system of capitalism, imperialism. A declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution, which you can find on revcom.us, says of this real revolution that it is, quote, not playing around with a few changes that leave this system in place and in power while benefiting only a small number. A revolution means a force of millions, drawn from many different parts of society and organized for an all-out fight to overthrow this system and replace it with a radically different and much better economic and political system, a socialist system based on meeting the needs of the people and carrying forward the fight for a communist world where there will finally be an end everywhere to the exploitation, oppression, and destruction of the environment that is built into this system of capitalism imperialism. Anything less than this revolution will completely fail to deal with the root of all the problems or lead to the actual solution, end quote. This real revolution and not playing around with a few changes benefiting just a few people here in this country while the rest of the world and millions of people here suffer needlessly, this is a theme that runs through today's RNL Revolution Nothing Less show in many different dimensions. The need to overthrow this system. The virulent opposition to revolution and its leadership by those who just want to divide up the spoils of this system. And all this in contrast to what has been brought forward by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, BA. Bob Avakian has further developed the scientific method, the strategy, and the program that can shine a light through the madness and the chaos that the system is constantly creating and can lead to carving a path forward out of this madness to the radically new world we need, developing a new framework for the liberation of all oppressed people and the emancipation of all of humanity we call the new communism. Here on the RNL show, we are followers of Bob Avakian. Through your experiencing BA on our show, we aim to provoke and inspire you to dig into what he has brought forward so that you too become followers of BA and, most important, contribute to the urgent, difficult, most liberating thing you could do and be about, revolution for the emancipation of humanity. And so with that, I want to welcome Sunsara Taylor to episode number 115 of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show in our studio in Los Angeles, California.
Glad to be here, Andy. Really good to be back with you again. And welcome everybody tuning in.
Okay, we got a lot up today. The first segment is going to be from our contributor, commentator, Lenny Wolff. And so following that segment from Lenny Wolff, we have a very appropriate segment from Bob Avakian from the film, his talk in 2018, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make a revolution. This segment is titled The Problem and the Solution, Up Against False Paths and Dead Ends.
After that, we're going to bring you an interview that Andy did with Paul Street, who's a frequent guest on this show. He's a writer for Counterpunch, and he did a piece recently called Why is the Left, red in quotes, left, red baiting rise up for abortion rights on the eve of fascist destruction? Andy talks with him about some of the themes in that article. We follow that with a short artistic segment illustrated by the crew here at the RNL show of a piece from Bob Avakian. And we close out the show with a couple of updates in the fight around women's fundamental right to abortion, which is very central to the role of women in this society and central in the fight for the future. So with that, let's dive right in. We're going to share with you a commentary from Lenny Wolff, who is a follower of Bob Avakian, an advocate for the new communism that Avakian has forged. And in this piece, he talks about the intensification of what is happening in the world right now, the rivalry between the US and China, also between the US and Russia, these major superpowers, and the threat and the danger posed to the people of the world. And where are the interests of the people in all of this? So let's go to Lenny Wolff.
For the past several weeks, the website revcom.us has been exposing what is behind the controversy over the Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. The article this week says Pelosi's early August trip to the island of Taiwan was a major and dangerous provocation by U.S. imperialism against its nuclear-armed rival, China. Pelosi left Taiwan, but the U.S. imperialists have continued to rapidly escalate their game of nuclear chicken with China, a game which threatens the very future of humanity. How dangerous is it? No less an authority than the infamous U.S. war criminal Henry Kissinger, a man who oversaw 5 years of the slaughter in Vietnam and Indochina, and who orchestrated the bloody coup that brought down an elected government in Chile, said, quote, "We are at the edge of war with Russia and China on issues which we partly created, without any concept of how this is going to end or what it's supposed to lead to." The articles on RevCom have drilled down beneath the phrases of defending democracy to show you the real class interests at work here. When this show is over, if you haven't read those articles yet, go read them. But the point I want to make in this segment is where the interests of humanity lie in all this, and how other radical political forces are falling out. These rulers of the U.S. are telling you that China is your enemy, but in actual fact, China is their enemy.
But they have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That's not going to happen on my watch.
China is their rival for the number one exploiter and oppressor of the people of the world, and they want you to line up behind them in their fight to stay on top. What Bob Avakian said a few months ago about America's proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, which, by the way, is an ongoing bloodbath of the Ukrainian people that could still very quickly and unexpectedly escalate to something far worse, essentially holds true here. Quote, "The interests of the imperialists on both sides who are involved in this war are not the same as, and in fact are in fundamental opposition to, the interests of the masses of people." Pause on that. The interests of the imperialists on both sides. The U.S. imperialists, your rulers, have for decades squeezed the blood out of the people of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The clothes on our backs, the cell phone in your pocket, that nice flat screen TV on your wall, even your ecologically correct solar panels or hybrid cars, all those items that they want to stupefy you into taking for granted come from the backs and the blood of the people of the world, millions of them children, super exploited in sweatshops owned by the U.S. imperialists, often in competition with similar sweatshops owned by the Chinese imperialists. Don't let them bribe you or blind you with these goodies. These are human beings just like you who are slaving away to create that wealth. And yes, China is imperialist and not socialist or somehow on the side of the people, despite what some so-called leftists may tell you. China hasn't been socialist for nearly 50 years. Since the great revolutionary leader Mao Zedong died, and his comrades were overthrown by a clique that decided to keep the name socialist while turning the country into a capitalist hell. Those new rulers have built themselves up over time, and now they're flexing their muscles. And both of these bloody empires, America and China, are caught in a trap if they don't keep expanding their domination and plunder. if they let their rival get the edge. For them, that's the equivalent of death. That domination and plunder is what they are contending over. That is what they are preparing to risk nuclear war and the very existence of humanity over. That is what they are either whipping you up about or else keeping you sedated over. Yes, the Democrats as well as the Republic-fascists. And in this case, actually, the warmongering is coming directly from the Democrats that you are being told to line up behind this November as your last hope. Because both the fascists and the Democrats, however much they are at each other's throats over how to rule this empire, are agreed that the empire itself must stand and must be ready to fight for its position, even if that fight risks the destruction of humankind. But don't worry. After all, we've got Bernie and AOC and the rest of the socialists in Congress. And here's what they said to condemn this provocative act of Pelosi and the rest. That's right. We searched online for comments. We contacted their office. And we couldn't find anything. In fact, Bernie's representative said very cheerfully, "We don't have anything for you now." Want to know why? Bernie's whole project of a more equitable division of the wealth would be nothing without the spoils plundered by America from the rest of the world. The whole project of Bernie and the squad, quiet as it's kept, also rests on Make America First, even if they don't want to be quite as crude as Trump about it. If you're someone who joined the Democratic Socialists of America or the DSA because you really do care about humanity and not just the people who happen to live in this country, and because you think that, or you thought that, electing socialists like Bernie will make for a more just world, or at least won't do any harm, maybe you need to come to grips with the logic of Bernie's position and with what humanity really needs. A revolution against all empires and all forms of oppression. But what about those leaders of the woke movements, some of whom over the past 2 months have trained their fire on trying to cancel, or worse, Bob Avakian, the RevComs, and the mass organization Rise Up for Abortion Rights? Well, here's what they've been saying. Surprised? You shouldn't be. Here's a point that Bob Avakian made last year. Quote, "It's striking that so many woke people do not expose and condemn the fact that the country they are living in, the good old USA, has, over nearly a century, been the most powerful imperialist oppressor in the world and the greatest destroyer of the environment, doing the greatest harm to humanity. How much in all the woke talk about privilege is there a denouncing and renouncing of American privilege, of American supremacy, and American chauvinism? How much a clear-cut stand that American imperialism should be firmly opposed in its attempt to maintain its position as number one oppressor worldwide, and that the masses of people in this country have no interests and no stake in American imperialism's rivalry with China, itself a rising capitalist imperialist power? How much a reckoning with the fact that people in this country share, even though quite unequally, in the spoils that come from American imperialism's plunder of the world's people, including masses of children? How much an orientation and declaration that it would be far better to do without these spoils, by doing away with American imperialism and struggling together with people all over the world to be rid of all imperialism and all relations of exploitation and oppression, all plunder of people, as well as the environment. Not very much. That quote is from the article Revolution and Emancipation, Not Petty Reform and Revenge, on Movements, Principles, Methods, Means and Ends. Look, things are coming to a head around the world and in a very concentrated way within this country itself. We, all of us, have to draw a bold line between the interests of humanity and the interests of America's empire. And we, all of us, have to choose the side of humanity. It's one or the other. And the future really is a choice, as B.A. says in his extremely important work, between something terrible or something truly emancipating. If you like what we say on this show, you need to come in tighter. And as a first step, help us to rapidly expand our audience. And you need to get deeper into B.A., Bob Avakian. Read and listen to what they so desperately don't want you to check out, what they so desperately slander. Get with, get into, help build the movement for the revolution humanity so desperately needs and the new communism brought forward by Bob Avakian.
From all this, it stands out very sharply that we live in a grossly lopsided world. A world where a few dozen billionaires have as much wealth as the poorer half of humanity, and a small number of ruling classes in a small number of countries dominate, oppress, and control the destiny of the masses of humanity, with consequences that are already terrible and could, before long, become catastrophic. And in everything that I've been shining a light on regarding the world we live in under the domination of capitalism, imperialism, we are seeing the consequences of a system based on the private appropriation by competing centers of capital of wealth that is socially produced through networks of production involving vast numbers, ultimately billions of people all over the globe, who are forced now to work in conditions and relations of production that exploit and dehumanize them. It is not simply greed that drives these capitalists to constantly seek ways to more ruthlessly exploit people. It is the fact that if they do not do this, or if some other capitalists do it more successfully, that is, even more ruthlessly, then they will face the prospect of not just falling behind, but actually going under, eaten up by other capitalist sharks. It is the private appropriation of socially produced wealth and the anarchy, the feverish competition and contention that results from this, which ultimately underlies and drives all the horrors that are concentrated in the 5 stops and the conditions to which the masses of humanity are continually subjected. The solution is to replace this system of private appropriation with a system where the socially produced wealth is also socially appropriated by a government actually representing the masses of people instead of a class of capitalist exploiters. And this wealth is then utilized on the basis of conscious planning in the interests and for the benefit of the people of society and ultimately the whole world. How this can be done is spelled out in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. This is the fundamental difference between the society and world we have with the system of capitalism and imperialism that we are forced to live under, and the world we could have. The bridge between these two worlds is revolution, a real revolution. Let's be honest, this is a difficult road, but there is no other way to finally put an end to the horrors that are continually brought forth by this system. And as hard as this is, it is possible if we go about it the right way, with the right outlook and approach, the right goals and methods, the right strategy and plan. So this is what I'm going to dig into through the course of this talk. First, let's return to the crucial question of what revolution really means. At the very beginning of How We Can Win, this is made very clear. An actual revolution does not mean trying to make some changes within this system. It means overthrowing this system and bringing into being a radically different and far better system. Radical means getting to the root, digging up the old system by its roots and replacing it with a fundamentally different system. And what opens the way to doing this is shattering the rule of capitalism over society. Through defeating and dismantling its institutions, such as the police and armed forces, that violently enforce this system's rule, and then bringing into being new institutions that serve the radical transformation of society and ultimately the world as a whole. How this could be done is something I will speak to in the second part of this talk. Here I want to underline the point that this is completely different than just winning some reforms under this system. Certain government concessions to the fight against injustice, for example, civil rights legislation, DACA, which granted temporary legal status to some immigrants brought here as children, or court decisions establishing the right to abortion and gay marriage, these were hard-fought victories. But the problem is that they are and can only be partial victories, dealing with only some aspects of oppression under this system, but not eliminating the oppression as a whole or the source of this oppression, which is the system itself. And as we are seeing, even where such partial victories are won, so long as this system remains in power, there will be powerful forces who will move to attack and undermine and seek to reverse even these partial gains. It is also very important to understand the difference between the possibility for certain individuals or even a certain section of the oppressed to improve their conditions or to make it under this system, and the reality that for the masses of oppressed people, the only way they can escape their conditions of oppression is by abolishing the system that maintains them in these conditions. Of course, the rulers of this system and their political operatives and media mouthpieces are forever pointing to the success stories of people who have risen from the ranks of the poor and oppressed to become rich and famous, or at least to realize the great American dream of becoming middle class. This is like going to a casino where by far most who play are played for suckers and sink deeper into a hole, while every time there is a winner, it is loudly celebrated, often with bells, sirens, and so on, to make people believe that if they just keep playing, they too can become winners. This touches on something of great importance: the relation between individuals and the larger society and world of which they are a part. Everyone, of course, exists as an individual. But at the same time, the larger society and world establishes the conditions within which individuals exist and function and shapes their outlook and values. Even the aspirations and the felt needs of individuals are shaped in this way. To cite a simple example, no one in 1970 felt that they needed to be on their cell phone continually. because cell phones did not yet exist. But once people have them, they have great difficulty doing without them, as we know. Here, a formulation by the founder of communism, Karl Marx, a formulation that has come to be known as the Four Alls, is very relevant. Marx wrote that the communist revolution requires and involves the abolition of all class distinctions among people, the abolition of all the production relations, the economic relations on which those class distinctions rest, the abolition of all the social relations that correspond to those production relations, and the revolutionizing of all the ideas that correspond to those social relations. Among other important insights that can be gained from what Marx is getting at here is the understanding that while, again, people exist as individuals, and their individuality is important and should be given due weight, overall it is the prevailing economic relations and the corresponding social relations and ideas that in a fundamental and overall sense shape individuals and individual aspirations. The divisions among people in a society like this, including the unequal and oppressive divisions between rich and poor, white and non-white, men and women, and so on, are real and objective. Democratic Party politicians keep saying things like, Trump is dividing us instead of uniting us. But these divisions are not caused by the divisiveness of someone like Trump. Trump makes use of these divisions in pursuit of his fascist agenda, but neither he nor anyone else has caused or could have caused these divisions. They are rooted in the very nature, functioning, and requirements of this system, in the way all this has historically evolved. To eliminate these divisions, it is necessary to eliminate this system.
I want to welcome my friend Paul Street, who's a labor historian and civil rights researcher by training. He's a prolific writer, author of 9 books, his latest being This Happened Here, Amerikaners, Neoliberals, and the Trumping of America. Paul is also a member, along with myself and my co-host Sunsara Taylor and Coco Das, of the editorial board of Refuse Fascism. And as such, he's been very active in Rise Up for abortion rights, including going to Washington, D.C. in the run-up to the Supreme Court decision that took away the right to abortion. And Paul also writes regularly for the website Counterpunch. And on August 1st, he published a column titled, Why is the left red-baiting Rise Up for abortion rights on the eve of fascist destruction? So I am pleased that he has joined me today from Chicago via Zoom. Welcome, Paul Street.
Oh, hi there, Andy. Glad to be here.
Okay, so Paul, you wrote at the beginning of your article the following. Rise Up for Abortion Rights, RU4AR, the organization that has led the struggle against the Christian fascist war on women's right to control their own reproductive lives. Each of the charges made against the organization is false and libellous, including preposterous and baseless claims of financial corruption. None of the false claims, you write, made against RU4AR is more provocative and chilling than the claim that it is nothing more than a front group for the Revolutionary Communist Party, which is in turn described as a cult under the spell of Bob Avakian. So I wonder if you could comment on this.
Well, many of these charges rise literally to the level of libel. And are baseless and made without the slightest hint of evidence. This cult thing has resonated, and you've talked about a number of them in the show already, is my understanding. This cult thing resonates among certain liberal, there's no ideology to it, across the ideological spectrum with various groups and folks, including those on the left. I don't know if people know exactly what a cult is. A personality cult would be such that if Bob Avakian, the leader of the RevComs, were to overnight embrace Christian fundamentalism or become a militant 9/11 truther, an anti-vaxxer, or to become a kind of revisionist, centrist, social democrat or something like that, that all his followers would follow in line with that. And that's not the case of anyone that I've met that associated with the RevComs at all. It's just utterly preposterous. In the claim of cult and cultism that's made, there's just no curiosity that I ever get from the people making this charge at all about what Avakian has written, what Avakian thinks, and why Avakian is considered a powerful and influential thinker among a whole bunch of people who consider themselves revolutionary socialists and communists. And I just, I find that really quite extraordinary. And it's a really sort of preposterous charge, to say the least.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into this a bit later. It's a very dangerous charge. It's the demonization of revolutionary leaders is a long history in this country, a long and a dangerous history. And when it gets combined with charges like of funneling money and things like this, all of which is, as you say, absolutely baseless, it creates a danger towards a revolutionary leader. This country has never tolerated revolutionary leaders, and even leaders who are leading significant mass protests for reform, like Dr. King. You write in your piece on Counterpunch that this attack is especially reckless and insidious because of the historical moment in which it is taking place.
It's just absolutely extraordinary. It's one of the most curious and telling things about the attack is that it comes literally the day after the decision and is taken up by a liberal magazine that calls itself named called Jezebel, by a progressive Zine people are familiar with called The Intercept, and that it goes up on something called New York City for Abortion Rights and is signed by 23 repro groups. And, this is what they chose to do on the day after the decision that abolished the 50-year constitutional right to an abortion. Not join us and others in the streets, in the public squares, not to launch a jerry-made of blistering, properly critical attacks on the decision, not to engage in direct action and shut shit down like we were advocating, not to call like we did, like Rise Up for Abortion Rights did for legal abortion across the land, but to issue a statement attacking the one leading top national organization that in a principled and militant and energized fashion, literally from the minute the Supreme Court took up this case in December of last year and all the way through the whole half year leading up to the decision, that argued against any advance surrender to a post-Roe era, and that developed techniques and direct action and slogans and rallies and marches and Instagram posts and the whole panoply of direct actions and social movement interventions to provide and prevent this decision in advance. The decision comes, and what the hell do they do? What do they do with this historical moment? They attack Rise Up for Abortion Rights, a united front organization in which, yes, there were RevComs, in which there were refused fascism people, in which there were liberals, in which there were progressives, in which there were moderates, everyone who was dedicated to direct militant social movement activism to try and shake the foundations of this country and send a message to Washington, D.C. You will not steal this fundamental human right that was won by struggle. The one organization that stayed true to how abortion rights were won in the very, very first place. And, that's just incredibly telling and extraordinarily significant that that's how they decided to respond to that. Now, I've had people push back on me when I say this is like McCarthyism or this is like COINTELPRO. I actually think in some ways it's worse, because this attack on a left-led group, the red baiting of the quote-unquote cult shaming of it, the red baiting of it, the libeling of it, the baseless accusations of which are no evidence of financial misappropriation, of cultural appropriation, of the whole list of preposterous charges comes at a particular moment in time where literally in this country, with the assault on abortion rights as the leading spear of the attack, as the leading battering ram, is literally the bourgeois democracy, electoral democracy, and previously normative constitutional rule of law is now on potentially its last legs in this country. And they are calling out and demonizing and shaming and red baiting an organization, a United Front organization, in a time where there's 440 million weapons in this country, in which there are just 30,000 militia members frothing neo-fascist Amerikaners willing to do violence, and a vast police state on the edge of aiding and abetting these militias and fascists in the conclusion of the bourgeois democratic era. In some ways, it's worse than the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and what was done to the Haymarket martyrs and all that, because we are at the end. And they don't get this. They don't get this timing of this era that we're in. They don't understand that they're playing with fire, that they're aiding and abetting neo-fascism in a time when there's a mass base for neo-fascism and a whole part of the American ruling class has gone over to neo-fascism. And it's incredibly reckless and it's despicable, to be perfectly honest with you.
You propose 10 reasons why they might have done this, okay? And it did, I have to say, when I was rereading the article, it made me think of the late night talk show by David Letterman, who some of our audience probably knows and others don't. But every show, he would start with the top 10 reasons or the top 10 list.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a copy of tonight's top 10 list.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's tonight's top 10 list.
Forgive me, I'm going to do that with your top 10 list so that we can then go into two of the points in some depth in this interview. Number one. These haters have a commitment to insider strategies of elite lobbying and major party electioneering. Number two, fury at being called out for advanced surrender to the reversal of Roe versus Wade. Number three, jealousy. Rise Up for Abortion Rights has challenged the choice establishment's appeasement with great talent and elan. Number four, turf protection. Number five, clickbait, salacious conspiracy mongering. Number six, in an anti-communist witch hunt. Number seven, failure to grasp the dire historical moment and deprecate the Revcom's observation that we are now facing a fascist section of the ruling class. Number eight, fake socialist inability to grasp the necessity of revolution. The democratic socialists' pitifully tame commitment to incremental and economistic reformism. Number nine, sleepy woke uber identitarianism. And number 10, desire to appropriate RU4IR's tactics and absorb them into top-down insider strategy. Okay, so look, I think those capture a whole lot of stuff. People should read the article and have some fun with it. So, Paul, first I'd like to get into your points 1 through 3 sort of together. But the essence of it is that the Democrats and these NGOs, which stands for non-governmental organizations that have been the form and the agency of the pacification of struggle into social service. In other words, instead of struggle of the people for their rights, we set up these non-governmental organizations, charities essentially, who are tied to politically and economically to social service and to channel any resistance they do mobilize into elections. So, for example, they sometimes will call a protest, but only for the purpose of channeling into voting and fundraising. And some of these small little leftist sects, like the socialist feminist group that New York City for abortion rights, they do some clinic defense and they do some small things, but a small thing at the edges of the larger problem that people in this country are facing with this fascist juggernaut and a political opposition in the ruling class that is no opposition or not much of an opposition. So I think you had a number of observations on this that'd be worth hearing from you about.
It was really quite extraordinary the extent to which these groups, and you can see it in their literature, not only surrendered in advance to these organizations. I'm referring to the Democratic Party. I'm referring to Planned Parenthood. I'm referring to NARAL. and I've seen a lot of their literature and saw it over the half year leading up to the well-telegraphed Dobbs v. Jackson decision, not only surrendering in advance to the undoing of the 50-year constitutional right to an abortion, but sounding like they saw it as an opportunity to increase funds for their direct service operations. And I heard actually from Democratic Party folks in Iowa looking forward to the decision as an electoral opportunity, as something that would work for them in the midterm elections. And of course, that's how they're talking about it right now. They didn't, but not just after, even before, and beneath all of this is and this kind of opportunistic and cynicism is a contempt for the people, a contempt for the types of struggle that won right to an abortion in the first place. That's called social movements. That's called people in the streets and the public squares. That's called people shutting stuff down. That's called people confronting power. They have contempt for that. They have contempt for the rank and file. They have contempt for the grassroots. They want everything to be handled from the top up or the top or the middle out. Leave it to us. We know what we're doing. We're going to lobby. We're going to protect your rights with campaign funding and campaigns. We'll put the right people in the place. That doesn't work. That's not how anything that's been won that's worth defending in this country has ever been won. It's always taken social struggle in the streets. It's true of the labor movement. It's true of the civil rights movement. It's true of the anti-war movement. And it was certainly true of the women's rights movement in the 60s and the 70s. They don't like that because once you open the door to that kind of activism, people meet and they form organizations and they exchange ideas and they call into question the accommodations of the middle professional class and upper class elites. And they start talking about things like revolution, and they start talking about having a regular popular presence in the streets, this is the consistent line that was coming from the mainstream liberal establishment choice organizations throughout. Leave it to us. And that wasn't Rise Up's perspective, and they had to pay a price. They had to be penalized for doing that. We showed them up, okay? There was a presence in the streets the minute that this decision came down saying, hell no, this decision must not stand legal abortion across the land. Your approach didn't work. Your approach doesn't work. And to them, that's sinful. That's a horrific attitude to have taken, and must be penalized and must be punished and must be demonized.
A so-called left that, to tell the truth, finds it frightening and distasteful to change the world radically at its root. Disgraceful. A left that is content with posing, devoid of rage or joy, its passion spent, deceiving mimic, miming what it claims to be opposing, rejects the path of revolution, insists there can be only one solution that is viable and desirable. Reform within the confines of this system. Change conforming to the dictates of this brutal order. Talks forever of democracy. Cover for dictatorship of bourgeoisie. Politics of identity that really comes back down to me. If it speaks of socialism, it is tired out, dried up dogma. No reality, lacking fire, ferment, and conviction. Impoverished imagination, lowered vision. The change it talks about is paltry fiction. Lifeless, desiccated, can't lead anyone to be emancipated. A left like that is all laid out. This whole damn system, root and source of all this madness, all laid out. Rupture, advance, beyond all that, no doubt. Putting an end to this insanity. Working for revolution to emancipate all humanity. That's what we got to be all about. All the rest that poses and opposes what cries out to be done. It needs to be over and gone. It's all laid out.
On Monday of this week, a 16-year-old who was pregnant and desperate for an abortion was told by a court in Florida that she was too immature to get an abortion. But apparently they thought she was old enough to be forced to have a child against her will. Think about the violence of that, the cruelty, the lifelong repercussions. And then multiply that times millions and millions. This is the future that the Christian fascists who are riding high right now after overturning Roe v. Wade are fighting for and prepared to hammer into place for women all across this country and, yes, around the world. This fight over abortion concentrates whether women will be enslaved, treated as incubators, as less than fully human with all the cruelty that comes with that, or whether women will be emancipated. And this is only going to intensify because male supremacy, the oppression of women, is so central to this society that we live in and the system of capitalism, imperialism, because the patriarchal family remains the basic economic unit of society and social unit of society. This is something that is going to intensify even as it's been strained and stretched and women have broken out of their traditional roles in many ways. This is what's fueling the violent, revengist, male supremacist movement to rip away the right to abortion and to enslave women. And this is why the fight over abortion will be not only an ongoing fight, but a huge part of the fight shaping the future, whether we will get something terrible, a fascist nightmare future that Bob Avakian has warned of, or something truly emancipating, a real revolution. And the emancipation of humanity, which Bob Avakian has also analyzed, we are in a rare time that could be possible. And this fight for abortion rights and the unleashing of the fury of women against the all-around oppression of women needs to be a mighty force in this fight for something beautiful, for real revolution. And so with that in mind, we're going to bring you two segments that highlight dimensions of the ongoing fight around the right to abortion. We're going to go down to Houston and talk with somebody who was at the women's convention that was just held there last weekend. And then we'll go out to the Bay Area. We'll bring you clips from a press conference of an important lawsuit that's being filed against police abuse of protesters there who stood up with Rise Up for Abortion Rights. All right, so now I'm very pleased to invite to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, a member of the Revolution Club who is also a national organizer with Rise Up for Abortion Rights. Chantelle, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Sunsara.
Great. So listen, we wanted to have you on because this past weekend, the Women's March, the National Women's March, did a women's convention down in Houston and brought women together from across the country. Over 1,000, maybe 1,500 people came from all over the country for a major convention. They are following up on what they called a Summer of Rage, which we didn't actually see all that much rage from them in the streets after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And a big focus on power to the polls, mobilizing people into the midterm elections as a major focus. And elsewhere on this program and in an ongoing way, we have done a very deep critique of why the elections are not going to be a solution to the crisis facing women, the loss of abortion rights, and to the larger crisis developing in this country. We need a real revolution and we need massive struggle against this rising fascism. So I want to acknowledge that off the bat. And yet, why we wanted to mainly talk with you is there was a tremendous amount revealed at this conference. People who are passionate, people who are agonizing, people who came from all over the country, and a lot of people who very much resonated with the message of Rise Up for Abortion Rights as well. So maybe you could start by telling us about this conference and some of who came out to it and the significance of that in your eyes.
Yeah, so this was the Women's Convention, and it was held on the 50th anniversary of the original Women's Convention, which was held in leading up to fighting for Roe v. Wade, or fighting to legalize abortion. So, and it was in the midst of a big feminist uprising, fighting for equality in all aspects. So this, it was really important that it was happening at this time, and that it was pulling women from all over the country. I think I talked to someone from almost every single state, and these women were participated in women's marches in the past. They were furious about the overturning of Roe, and they, wanted to learn how to organize and wanted to learn, what do we need to do to get this right back. So yeah, that's a little bit of who was there.
You know, you were telling me earlier some of the stories of, especially these women who came from, as you said, surrounded by Trump country. Oftentimes, they're very neighbors surrounding them. A lot of them came out in ones or twos, but you actually, and many of them said to you that they felt very isolated and fearful where they're from. But when you saw them together like this, you get a sense there's a lot of people out there who are silent right now, who are not mobilized, but actually potentially could be if they understood the problem they're facing and had a different understanding of how to fight it. If you could give a sense, a further sense of who came to the booth, the Rise Up for Abortion Rights booth, what attracted them, and and what they shared with you, what you learned about what drew them here.
Yeah, so hearing from these women from all over the country, the ones that came to the table, sometimes they'd never heard of Rise Up for Abortion Rights before, but they did see the green because in the opening presentation, they emphasized what it meant and just briefly and showed some pictures of even Rise Up for Abortion Rights and other people using the green bandana in the protest. So they made the connection. Oh, these are the green people, because no one else in that convention, was putting this green wave forward like we or at all, actually, just us. And they're like, oh, these are the people who are fighting for abortion rights. And there's women were telling stories about, there's small groups in the middle of Georgia or the middle of Florida or even like Illinois, Idaho, all over. But there's a woman who said she actually doesn't know anyone in her town. And one of these isolated people, and because in Missouri, on her street, in her neighborhood, it's a lot of Trump flags, a lot of American flags, and they're the loudest at the school board meetings. They're the loudest everywhere, anti-maskers, the whole 9 yards. And so she said an act of protest that she, instead of having an American flag, she put up the rainbow flag for LGBTQ rights. And, she didn't march with Black Lives Matter, but she said she put the Black Lives Matter poster in her window just to show that there's someone there, and to, as an act of resistance. And for that, she would be harassed. She'd get hollered at. Her signs would get ripped up, taken down. She'd put them back up, like determined to have the statement. And even that they would call the police on her house for random reasons just to harass her and scare her and intimidate her. How many people in her town do feel the same way, but maybe aren't as brave, to put something up, or, sitting at home and not knowing anyone or not knowing what to do. And how, we need to change that for all these people that are, sitting at home right now on the sidelines to be brave, to be courageous, but actually modeling that. So I thought that was pretty important.
The other thing that I thought was particularly interesting that you were sharing earlier was the most popular slogan and sign at the Rise Up for Abortion Rights booth, which was packed all weekend. It was just flocked with people. Maybe you could give a sense, share what the most popular was and why you think, what's the significance of that, what you draw from that.
Yeah, so we had forced motherhood as female enslavement. And people were really drawn to that. That was the most popular poster. And we'd ask why, and people would just, because it's true. And when you open it up and you talk about, what is this about, this attack on abortion? And it is to enslave, it's to control women's bodies, but not just their bodies, their futures, their destinies, their whole role in society being reduced to breeders. And, it was, I think, refreshing to people because it had, it's not normally about. And also it was able to open up things like that's the aim of this assault, is to do this to enslave women, not what people are so used to hearing, like at women's marches and other marches, they make it about bodily autonomy, that this is an attack on my personal freedom or liberty in some abstract way because it's just an attack on my body. And so then it also, what was helpful is that Rise Up for Abortion Rights actually had the commensurate, response to that, which is, we're not going to take that. We're going to rise up. And we're going to call on everyone else who refuses to accept this reality of forced motherhood to get into the streets. And so they were excited to see people fighting for them and for like all women in this country, and to be a part of then being connected up with a movement that, is talking about it. And, so that I thought it was really important to be there, especially at the Women's March, convention, to be there with that message, and for that message to actually be popular, well received, and thanked even for being. So that was really awesome.
I think it's telling us a lot about what needs to be fought for and what can be called forward among a broad section of people in this country, and the urgency of that. So Chantelle, I want to thank you for first of all, for going down there and being part of the team that brought this message out, and for coming here on the show, the RNL show, and sharing with us.
Yeah, I appreciate being up on here, and I was happy to go. It was really important and fun.
If you've been watching our show or reading our website, you're aware that there have been a series of very vicious, unprincipled attacks by so-called movement activists, as well as in the media, against Rise Up for Abortion Rights, against myself, against the RevComs, and against Bob Avakian. It's very important that Rise Up has stood up to these, that we have stood up to these, and that needs to continue. It gives people strength and it clarifies things, which we've been fighting to do on this show. It's also really worth noting that at this convention, in talking to Chantelle, we didn't include this in the interview, but in talking to her, she shared that most people there had no idea about these attacks, just like most people in society. We need to be oriented with this revolution and those involved in Rise Up for Abortion Rights out to this broad reservoir of people, the broad masses of people who don't know that there is a fight and how to wage this fight for the future that we need. So I wanted to just add that as a reflection off that interview. And next, we want to share with you some footage of a press conference from last week where the longtime civil rights lawyer, John Burris, took up and filed a lawsuit against the San Francisco police on behalf of two members of Rise Up for Abortion Rights and the RevComs, who staged a very bold and courageous protest at the NBA Finals just a few days before the overturning of Roe v. Wade. They'll tell you about that. In the course of this, they were viciously brutalized. One of them was strapped to a gurney and injected with sedatives against her will. And this is what the lawsuit is about. They will tell you about it. Here, I just want to note that this kind of repression, if it's not stood up to, will have a tremendously chilling effect. And it makes it all the more important, not just for this case, but for the atmosphere in society overall, that when people are attacked for rising up, that others come and defend them and stand up and have their backs and make that a principle of our movements of opposition. As I said, John Burris is a longtime civil rights attorney. Among other important cases, he represented Rodney King in a lawsuit against the LAPD. He represented the family of Oscar Grant, who was murdered by BART police in Oakland, and a number of other cases. And we're going to start with him in this press conference footage.
First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Burris,
historic civil rights attorney, for meeting with us and taking our case. Throughout this process, he has been forceful and adamant that injecting protesters with a sedative, specifically me, was an outrageous violation.
I have filed a civil rights lawsuit, federal civil rights lawsuit, against the city and county of San Francisco. This lawsuit is really one to say you just can't inject someone with a sedative without having more facts for you to justify it. There was no safety issue as it relates to her or anyone else. She had not been threatening. She had not been verbally abusive. She was protesting about Roe versus Wade. The injection in someone's body without their permission is a seizure under the Fourth Amendment.
This has been a very heavy time that we've lived under, to see the Supreme Court of this country overrule 50 years of precedent, to say that women are no more than incubators, to enslave women, to say that basic control over women's bodies is not theirs. And so that's why the NBA Finals, myself and my fellow resistor here, we came to the Chase Center because we knew the eyes of the world will be on this. That was only a few days before the Supreme Court overturned Roe. And I went down there full of fear, right? Because you know, there's going to be consequences, right? But I knew that if I don't do that, if I don't stand up, if I don't say, not today, not on my watch, the thought of a single teenager being forced against her will to give birth motivated us. We got down there, we unfurled our banner, and we were brutally dragged out. You'll see the bruises on Magda's skin.
I saw Kareem hogtied. Their hands are strained behind their back, somebody's knee on their back, and I went into a panic about it. They were being treated like an animal, and then I was treated like an animal, like by myself. And then I was ejected from the Chase Center. And then began some of the worst 45 minutes of my life because I was worried for Kareem's life. I saw what was happening to them. I saw the racialized nature of what was going on here. I learned that they had been sedated, tied to a gurney, injected with a drug against their will, sedated like Elijah McClain, a 23-year-old black man who died in police custody after being sedated, like Kareem was being sedated. No one in police custody is disposable. Kareem is not disposable. Kareem is not disposable, and I am not disposable. Oh, yeah. And the millions of women and girls whose lives are impacted by the overturn of Roe v. Wade, they are also not disposable.
I want to say again what Mr. Burr said, is that we were engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience, which I said to them over and over. And while I was on the ground, handcuffed in front of the emergency vehicle, one of the firefighters came with a needle towards me, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I flinched and I said, no. What if I'm allergic? He injected a needle into my skin to sedate me. We're out here, and this case is to say that that is chilling. That is a chilling attack on civil rights. And I look back and I see the young people behind me, the high school students. What message are they trying to send if they're going to do this to people? And so this case, it's not just a civil case. It's a case to say that we will not accept this or tolerate this, and we're going to fight it.
All right, so that brings us to the end of episode 115 of the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. I want to remind you to spread the show, share it with friends, watch it again, and leave a comment below. Andy, what do you think?
I think you should leave a comment below. We want to know what you think, but we've gotten some more comments lately and more people are watching the show, but I'm going to pose a couple questions that you can speak to in the comments below. You can do it today, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it all week long, and that would actually be important. Maybe we'll get a little bit of a debate going on. So there were two sharp contrasts that were posed in today's program. Number one, we said that for humanity to really be free, to overcome all forms of oppression and exploitation requires overthrowing the system and replacing it with a different system and not just making a few changes. Well, what do you think about that? And do you have a question about this? And number two, social democrats, anarchists, and wokesters programs only deal with distributing the spoils of this system. And as Lenny Wolff earlier in today's program referenced from Bob Avakian, these woke folks never tire of ranking privilege, but they never seem to talk about the privilege of living in the imperialist USA. Again, what do you think about that? And what are your questions? Write that down below, or you can even send us a more extensive email at therevcoms@gmail.com.
All right, so with that, next week we'll be back, 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, right here on the RNL, Revolution Nothing Less show.
All right, good night.